So now we're going to get into I will be moderating, asking each panelist some questions just about climate change and artistry. And then we'll likely leave a lot of time for folks to ask the panelists questions. Starting with, tell us a little bit, each person, about your artistry path. Like, how you got into the art form that you do, how have you practiced art, especially even during social distancing? Have you practiced art? Have you not practiced art? And anyone can start.
I'll go ahead, start. I thought I was going to be an actress, which is why I started going to poetry slams. I was like, oh, cool, I could do a monologue that I wrote myself, because my university, which was Texas State University, wasn't going to allow, they said they were only going to cast in authentic roles, which meant that they were only going to cast people in the role and the race that they were in the script. And all of the scripts for the year were white. So I wasn't going to be able to get on stage at all that year, which was my freshman year of college, 2003. And so I saw Poetry Slam as a way for me to get on stage and perform the way I want to. That eventually changed to, I don't want to tell false stories and I don't want to just perform. I would like to tell something honest about what's happening to me in my life. And then it morphed again right around Darfur, where it became a tool that I could use to talk about what was happening in the world, and how it impacts us when we're so far away from what's happening in the world, how it comes home. It always comes home. And so now my practice is a mixture of all of those things, right? I can't talk about myself without talking about how it impacts others. Currently, I have a fellowship from the Right of Return USA, which is for previously incarcerated artists. Um, I was incarcerated in the Hayes County Jail, and it was for a misdemeanor charge. And it literally and changed everything about my life, every facet of my life. And now what I'm doing is a project called ARCO. And it's about my journey from California, which is where I was born in Compton, to Texas. And it's going to be a full-length book of poetry, a full-length rap album, a full-length photo series, and a full-length documentary about incarceration and detention centers, and about that like whole journey. I am talking about the weather. I am talking about the land. I am talking about policies and how they're impacted. And I'm trying to find a lyrical way to say this is fucked up over and over and over again, but in a way that's new. And I'm hoping that this artwork that I'm creating will be a tool that can be used not just by myself, not just for my people, but for everyone, to have that conversation in classrooms, in conversations when you're on panels and things like that. I want it to be a tool that can be referred to again and again. So it's a big undertaking, and I thought I would be able to do it in a year. Pretty sure I'm going to be doing this for the next 3 years.
Real. Thank you so much for that overview. And I'm so interested in ARCO as a like kind of multimedia project. How do you envision like specifically talking about climate change within this project, within the realm of incarceration? I'd love for you to say more about that.
Yeah. So like there are different things I would like to do. I'd like to talk about what the weather was on each of the days that people were killed, that are being highlighted in my project. Because that's one of my theories, is that like, the warm weather actually lends to more dynamic events happening. Like I can't recall off the top of my head a murder that was done by police in public on video that was in a winter time or in the middle of snow. Like I can't recall it. It may have happened, I just don't recall it. And so just asking myself, like, as the warm days get longer and we lose some of that coolness, does that mean that this is why we're seeing such a what feels like an influx? I know it's not an influx. I know this is historical. We've always been murdered, but like, is this the reason why? Um, I'm also interested in how people move across the US. It used to be like, if you want to be in the snow, you go to the east. If you want to be in the warm, not hot, warm weather, you go to the west, right, to get to the beaches. And if you like being hot, you go to Arizona. But how has policy impacted our movement throughout the US, and how has that policy been in relation to what's happening with the weather? I hear that, there's a potential wall that needs to be built by New York because of the water that might flood the state. Like, okay, I want to know, like, what is that going to look like, and how has that already been predicted in our past media and our past art? Like, how is that going to impact the people who are imprisoned there? I'm very interested in several of the prisons that have been closed and how those people have been moved into county jails. Um, a lot of the work I'm doing is about rural locations, and rural locations are hit by the climate crisis, but we don't talk about farming. We don't talk about how that impacts the rate of incarceration, or the fact that, people who are incarcerated are used to put out fires. People who are incarcerated are used to farm the land. People who are incarcerated are used to keep everything affordable for us. So it's, like I said, a big project, a really big project, but I think it's all connected.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like actually read a study not too long ago, and it was specifically talking about violence in Dallas and how it's always higher in the summertime, or like when it's always higher, like when the heat is hot, because that's not necessarily in the summertime anymore. But a study that came out a couple years ago, so that's really cool.
Yeah, if you read Patricia Smith's Incendiary Art, Incendiary, I think it's just what it's called, but Patricia Smith's books kind of low key do follow weather. From I'm trying to remember the name of the Katrina book. Can't remember the name of the Katrina book, but if you just follow Patricia Smith's work, a lot of it is in relation to weather. It's just not like obviously about weather. It's just kind of like, this is another major natural event that's happened, and it's deeply impacted people's direct lives. So
Sorry, I'm muted. Thank you so much for sharing. Other folks on the panel, would you love to just tell us a timeline, artistry, and how you may practice artistry now?
Um, so I just consider myself a writer. I've had like the most success, whatever that means, via poetry, but I do a lot of story writing and essays as well. Uh, really started in fourth grade. My dad is from Jamaica, listened to a lot of reggae growing up, and I used to listen to the songs and just rewrite the rhyme schemes basically in my journal on road trips. And then I just have never really stopped writing at any stage in my life. I started thinking of writing as like an art form when I got into slam poetry here in Austin. I was actually living out in California. I was working in Big Sur and having a miserable time despite the fact that it's considered a paradise. And the National Poetry Slam was in Oakland that year, which was about a 2-hour drive. Went up, um, didn't really talk to the Austin team, but I saw them perform. And when I decided I was going to come back to Texas, I'm from San Antonio, I knew I was going to pursue Austin Poetry Slam. So I got on the team with them in 2016. I was on the team, maybe 2015. I'm sorry, I can't remember. It was 2016. On the team in 2016, and awesome, one of the best experiences of my life. I got burned out really quick though, because it is a lot, and never stopped writing, but I definitely stopped performing. And now a project I'm working on. Have always also been into the outdoors, and I'm working on a project that's going to honor Harriet Tubman. Um, I want to. So she went on the Underground Railroad mission 19 times, and it's 90 miles. If you do the multiplication, that's 1,710 miles. And so I'm going to do 1,710 adventure miles. So like biking, running, paddling, looking into like kite skiing, that kind of stuff. I want to document it via podcast. And I want to I am trying to figure out how I'm going to word it, but I'm not inviting men. And so anyone who is not a man is welcome to join these adventures, interview them, and it's all just going to be highlighting just how much of a badass Harriet Tubman was. And then at the end, I will feel like I have earned a Harriet Tubman tattoo. And so that's like the project I'm planning, working on, because I need to like, I think I'm basically gonna have to take off 1.5 years. So I need to like be able to pay for my life for 1.5 years. So all of that goes into it, but that's where I'm at currently. Still writing. I will probably never stop writing, but that's like my current project.
That's really beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. And I'm very interested in this like journey that Harriet Tubman went on, and just where we are today is just kind of wild to see. But thank you. Althea, did you want to share?
Yeah. So I guess my artistic context has to start with music, because I was raised like from tiny childhood forward, singing on tables forcibly for the most part for family members. But I love music, and it was my first like artistic practice. But I did come into writing later on, more towards high school, and really fell in love with poetry. Reading, listening, learning from other people about other people from poetry, like, and feeling like that was a way to really connect without asking more from people than they were ready to give or willing to share, which also made me feel like I had options for how to talk about myself and explore myself. And I feel like my poetry practice like slowly built along with like my music practice kind of falling away. And I eventually, I feel like my artistic practice took a backseat to other priorities. Like I decided to become a programmer. I decided to pivot from working in creative endeavors to try to gain some skills that would hopefully have a direct impact on struggles that I was working like literal climate change struggles I was working on. So my artistic practice took somewhat of a backseat. But while I say that, like, I feel like that can be misleading, because a lot of people talk about those things as dichotomies. And for me, it was actually realizing that my art was a way of coping with my experience, and that like even when I wasn't actively prioritizing it as what I was doing, focusing on mostly, I still had time for it and needed to make time for it for my own well-being and for my mental health. And I ended up kind of developing a poetry practice that I feel like now is more reflective of that need and that catharsis in like having very little time set aside just for it. So that's kind of where I'm at with it now. And I, in terms of music, still have actually a lot of goals. That's something that I've been really trying hard to just set aside even a small amount of time for nothing but, once again, maybe recording something. But it's been like 5 years since I've done anything like that. So I haven't, and it's like still on the horizon. Right now it feels a little impossible because there's just so much happening, and I feel like compelled to prioritize some of what's going on that's more urgent, I think. So I still want to hold on to that dream, but it can happen at another point. Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to hold on to that dream for you as well. You kick-ass singer as well as writer. So be happy to have y'all. And you brought up actually a really cool point that I want to talk about a little bit, Althea. How climate change is a race issue, because when you're talking about your work with Standing Rock, you're talking about like Dakota Access Pipelines. And that very much is like, you know, we know that that's a race issue. We know that that's a Native American and Indigenous issue, but it is also a climate issue because pipelines are fucking terrible for the environment. And we all happen to be like queer by POC on this panel, which, you know, I maybe have designed, I don't know. But I'd love to talk about how climate change and, I would love to talk about how like the problematicness of like not talking about race in climate change conversations like has come up for you and the communities you serve, and also like what are solutions that feel more equitable for BIPOC and queer folks that are not currently like practiced, in y'all's opinion.
So I'm sorry. You want to go, Soups?
Yeah, no, you go for it.
The first thing I wanted to say is like I'm having a very particular conversation about what it means to be queer, what it means to be non-binary in the climate crisis. Um, I feel like, at least in my personal experience, being non-binary allows me the flexibility and the creativity to understand that there's not one way of being, and that things happen over a slow period of time, and that there are so many nuances to what it means, at least for me, to be non-binary, what that means to be queer. And when I say queer, I mean pansexual. Like, what it means for me to not have boundaries allows for me to understand that, yes, your background is a beach on a sunny day, and it can also snow at the same time, right? I can say both of those things can happen at the same time because that's what kind of world we live in. I'm able to like think a little bit more outside of the box versus like, you know, every season happens, there's a day that it begins and a day that it ends. Like, I'm not stuck so much to those things. As far as like biopic and what it means to like live sustainably, we have, I feel like there are not systems, there are community initiatives that exist. I'm thinking in particular of the Night Out for Safety and Liberation. It's based out of California, happens normally in August. I think this year they pushed it back to October. It's a community thing. They prep all year for it, out of the Ella Baker Center. Um, Night Out for Safety and Liberation is specifically to think about what it means to keep your community safe without having to call the cops. So like, who are we going to call when there's domestic abuse happening? Who are we going to call when someone's been shot? How do we prepare as a community without having to call the cops? Like, what does it look like to just completely remove them from the system? Like, we just create our whole new thing, just us. And I think that this is the time that we have to be having those conversations and looking at those ideas, and like not just looking at them, but like putting them into practice. The other night, you know, I saw some people getting into a fight outside of my apartment, and in my head I was like, I know I'm not calling the police, but what's the option? Do I personally go over there? Do I, like, you know, what's going to be, at what point do I step in, or do I let them handle that? My sister right now is manic depressive. She's homeless with her 3 kids out on the streets. And she refuses to get help, and she won't let us come and get the kids. I don't want to call the cops, but she's in Arizona and I'm in Texas. Like, what am I supposed, what are the steps that I can take to do this? And I think that's crowdsourcing, right? Crowdsourcing information and sharing that information. The social media is not just there for our fun and entertainment. It's a tool to be used. Like, I don't know how to do this. Can you teach me how to do this? And so I think that's the way that we'll find sustainability, is that we keep doing that until we're able to put together a working plan of what the community looks like when it's not based on the police. And then we can use that to multiply across communities. That's my thought.
Yeah, my answer when I think about like climate change affecting queer and just people of color, people of different queerness, I like that question intersects with so many things. And I particularly think about how climate change is affecting housing and access to food. When we change the climate, we change the actual ground and the growing seasons of food, right? So I wonder, like, for like queer youth who are not accepted in their home, and then face homelessness, will, I think, at the exact same time then face the problem of food. And how like cool would it be if there was a neighborhood who turned their front yards into gardens, and they know they could walk through and find food, right? Or Out Youth is an organization we have here in Austin helping them. But that's how I really see it affecting, is just like people of color and queer people are going to face, like, statistically, financial hardship, which will then lead to access to housing. and where you find housing is where you're going to grocery shop. And all of that is how I see climate change really affecting the community you asked about, KB. Solutions is kind of what Felita pointed on, is we have to change policy. And who can we call? Because I also will not call the police. And I've been like, I don't have an answer, but I've been thinking about what would I do if someone were to call me? And then how can we multiply that, basically?
Sorry, those are really good answers, and I'm thinking about them. I guess I would love to call out the work of a friend of mine in this, in terms of like if a resource for more information about how statistically communities of color have been targeted for exploitation of their land and their climate well-being, basically their ecosystem and their resource, like their natural resources, sorry. So that's actually something that there's a lot of information and like documentation. We can see the patterns, and we can see that sometimes that applies to rural communities like reservation communities, but sometimes it applies to urban communities that simply are disenfranchised enough to be vulnerable targets to like the oil and gas industry or to other industries that destroy our ability to have a healthy climate and to have a healthy way of life. So the person I'm getting to is Fabiana Rodriguez, who does a lot of work out in Oakland and collecting a lot of this documentation and making it presentable and understandable into like shorter form content and memes and other ways of trying to get the information forward. So Fabiana is a great resource. I'll put her name in the chat. Fabiana. And then to speak to what you were saying about the communities specifically in my life. So I took part in the struggle against the Dakota Access Pipeline and witnessed firsthand how the community there, the multiple tribes that make up the Sioux Confederacy, was being targeted and had been targeted partially, like in that case, directly as a result of a white community, or an overwhelmingly white community, I should say, rejecting that pipeline and rejecting that destruction of their environment and pushing that destruction from their physical climate, their physical ecosystem around them, their perception of their connection to the earth being that they could just push the problem far enough out of sight, and that would actually protect them. Which, first of all, also I should mention that in reality, like because of the way that the pipeline is constructed and because of the amount of damage done in the process, it does affect even the communities that think that they are pushing things away from them. In reality, most of the time when we go back later and we look at the impacts, we see that they didn't succeed even in doing that was not even, that didn't even have that kind of an effect. So we are all connected in the sense that, especially when it comes to water, we don't have the option to treat ourselves as separate, because our aquifers are all connected, our rivers are all connected, our lakes are all connected, and we have to treat it as a holistic situation. When our water is under attack, we have to see that as a holistic threat to all of our well-being. And yes, to those of us who have, like those of us who are queer, those of us who are people of color who have statistically less access to resources, also will have less ability to protect ourselves from the consequences when the consequences inevitably come down. So it's like this huge trickle down, like statistically enumerated effect. And at this point, I feel like what I need to see that come into the conversation in a really active way, because there's a lot of attention on climate change, but it's very much the Greta Thunberg narrative, and it decenters the reality, which is that our planet is being attacked by industry, and it is threatening all of our well-being, but it is being targeted specifically in communities, in locations, in pieces of land that are vulnerable, partially because of ongoing acts of injustice and histories of injustice that have already permeated into those spaces. So we have to take those things into account, and we have to prioritize our attention accordingly, because we have to preserve what is left of the land, what is left of our natural resources. If we're going to be able to build the sustainable future, we literally have to have a stage to build it upon, and we are losing that. We are losing it, and that is something that I don't see discussed. So even getting to a solution, getting some of that money, getting some of that attention focused in that direction right now is a challenge, because it's so easy to co-opt that narrative and push it away from that focus. So I'm sorry if I got a little emotional, but I hope that was coherent.
No, I love that. I'm learning so much. Thank y'all so much for answering that. I want to leave with like one more question and then get into the performance aspect so we can hear y'all's beautiful work, and it'll be great. And give folks time to answer some questions. Y'all, we might go over time. I just want to say that it's already 3:15. But I really want to get to this last question and then to the performances. So my last question for y'all is, when you imagine a climate conscious Austin/Central Texas that is cognizant of race, cognizant of all of the like ways in which we are people, but also conscious of the climate and doing like better work around that, what comes to mind? And what steps do we need to take in order to get there, in your opinion?
One of the first things I would encourage, myself included, because I'm not going to have all of the words in this answer, is to really look at what is the natural geological makeup of Austin when it comes to the land we're on. So I know in East Austin right now, that is actually a grassland, and rockscaping has become really popular in East Austin. So people are tearing out the grass, putting down rocks, but it's grassland, so the grass is coming back. So now there's an increase of like pesticides to kill the grass. And it's wild because East Austin, so West Austin, we're actually like on a divide. And the reason I said, even including myself, West Austin's on a different type of land. But pesticides aren't good to breathe. They're not going to help anything grow. They're made to kill. But anyways, I also think like the climate change that I'm most worried about, Faylee, to hit on this, is heat, right? Global warming. And plants naturally cool everything down. And East Austin is actively ripping out plants, which is a bummer. And they're doing it for aesthetics. And so many plants can be beautiful. So we can just change it and like find what grows well in grasslands and grow that instead. So for me, I would love to see Austin value plants, plant more plants, protect the plants. If you are interested in learning more about that, one of the first places I would go to is a nonprofit called Tree Folks. They do a lot of work with that. They're amazing. So that would be like, I would love to see Austin, which was like started, the city of Austin was started appreciating nature. I'd like to see us all return to that, especially as people move in to Austin, making that the norm.
I love that. Thank you so much. Other folks, ideas?
Jump in. I just want to second the garden comment, because yes, gardens, I love gardens, and I'm gardening myself in my front yard right now. So I also am like not like super experienced gardener. Like I've been gardening in small ways my whole life, but this is definitely my biggest garden project. So trying to grow food primarily, and herbs that can be used for medicinal purposes, but also, like you said, just trying to increase more plants and more cooling into the space as much as possible, and get rid of not natural grasses, but grass that doesn't need to be there, grass that consumes a lot of water, is unnecessary, or is only for aesthetic purposes, etc. So that's, I've been ripping out the lawn that was originally there in front of my house. But so I would say gardens is a huge part of it, and kind of, because I feel like also, sorry, to make sense of that, it can be overwhelming. And so for me, gardening is also a way to kind of step back and reconnect to my own relationship with the earth, and just start small. Like this is literally one example, one plant that I am going to build relationship with, and then like build upwards from there. And like that's been very meaningful for me in terms of starting to think about how the land provides for my well-being, not just my food, but also medicine, also my joy. You know, what does it provide to me to tend to the plants? What does it provide to me to have that relationship? So that's something that I think is really meaningful on a personal, like what can a single person kind of do immediately around them? If you even have space for like a small plant, it would be like, I think, a way to start that conversation with yourself and with like, yeah, just to start it. And I know that like accessibility to that is an issue. And so like, that's also something I really want to do with this garden, is to give away plants, because one thing that happens when you grow a lot of plants is you end up with more plants than you need. So you get to give them away. And that's, I think, a gift to be able to give them to other people, and hopefully like start that process for other folks. So that I think is really meaningful. I also like really want to stress actively resisting the endeavors as best we possibly can. And I know it's incredibly difficult under pandemic also to resist the efforts of the fossil fuel industry to continue to destroy what's left of our waters and our aquifers. I mean, in Central Texas, we're facing the Permian Highway pipeline, which is trying to be pushed through, and they've already begun construction. We have, you know, these are issues that are being pushed by massive billionaire corporations. So I'm not trying to say that that's something that, you know, a single person can just handle, but I want us to keep our eyes on it, and I want us to keep actively calling attention to this destruction and not just allowing it to take place unabated, and start the conversations with the people around us. How can we, at the very least, slow the roll of that destruction? And, you know, ultimately, how do we stop these companies from coming in and taking our natural resources and destroying our access to the land? So that's something that I don't have an easy I don't have an easy answer for. And actually, my best answer is to look to Indigenous leadership. In Texas, we have a complicated situation because we have we don't have a coherent federally recognized tribe system for the state, but we do have Indigenous leadership that's present here. The Indigenous Environmental Network is one such organization that brings together Indigenous leadership from Texas, but also from other parts of the United States, and they're working against the Permian Highway pipeline. There's also other groups who I look to for guidance in terms of how do we move towards stopping these giant destructive projects. And so, like, I would urge other people to also look into them and look to them as leaders. So.
Yeah, I'm piggybacking off of everything. I was homeless in East Austin for a little bit, so I remember what it looked like before a lot of people had moved over there and changed some of the land. I think what is practical, like Althea said, plants at home. I did not a year ago have any plants in my house, and I wondered why I was so stressed. And you know, it had a lot to just feel like I wasn't connected to nature. And I told someone about it at Lambda last year, and they gifted me a plant. And I got really hype about it, and I put it on Twitter, and I was like, oh my God, I have a plant. It's amazing. And the SIL, which is the one that has sent the first plant, sent a second plant for free. So then I had 2 plants. And then my upstairs neighbors moved out, and they left so much crap, including 7 plants. I know you guys can't see it, but like, you guys can't see it. He's huge. So I have like a bunch of tall plants, and then I have purchased 2 more since then. And I can tell you that my sense of peace and well-being has definitely improved. You know, alongside getting therapy. All those things are necessary. But also just creating a space, a personal space that feels cultivated, that feels natural. And I do talk to my plants, and I sing to my plants, and I don't want to get another pet because I travel too much outside of the pandemic. But this is one thing that I can baby. This is one thing that I can parent is a plant. I can try to give it as much as it needs. And just that act of caring for something else, so not just someone else, but for something else besides myself, is helpful. As far as the community goes, I really do like, I want to find out more about this Tree Folks guys. I think that Austin is one of those weird places where they'll follow just about any major trend, um, even if it's like far out. And I feel like if you were to like interact with a bunch of the influencers that exist in that space, and even artists, right? I think it's really important that we make sure we talk about what art can do. Um, if you were to get a bunch of visual artists and a bunch of musicians and a bunch of poets in that area to all push one initiative to include more plant life into the city, and to make it, they have their art walks where you go to multiple locations, like, you know, to do a plant walk, or to make it like just an initiative. We're going to spend the next 2 years or next 3 years. 3 years is probably more preferable, but next 3 years just trying to build up plant life in Austin, and make it about, you know, celebrating, having a good time, getting close to the earth, make it really hippy dippy like Austin. And I feel like you would be able to get a lot of people on board with that, and it would make it cool to invest in making sure that you have the natural sources there. Um, because unfortunately, like, we wish that people cared for the simple fact of caring, but that's not how that rolls. I don't know if you guys have seen the sassy queer POC on Twitter and Instagram, who basically just smokes weed and talks about plants. Do y'all know who I'm talking about? I gotta look them up. Uh, but basically all they do is smoke weed and talk about, this my bitch right here. My bitch is a, you know, technical name for snake plant. Like, you know, and they like water this so many times a day, and they cool with the shadows, but like, you know, you still gotta like, but it's very just entertaining to watch, and it's very honest for that person to talk about plant life and how to take care of plants and how to include plants in your daily life. And they've built a whole platform off of it, right? I think it's just a matter of finding ways to talk about all of these things that we care about in a way that's easy for others to digest, and for others to feel like they can have a good time with it and not just be preached at, but also feel like they're a part of it. I know in New Mexico, I think I want to say it was Las Cruces. I might be wrong. New Mexico, it feels like it's Las Cruces. I might be wrong. It probably isn't Las Cruces, but there was a hip hop show, and it was all about underground hip hop and graffiti art, and it was based off of the Dakota Pipeline. So it was all about water. Saba, do you know Saba? Saba Ware, graffiti artist.
I'm about to come up. Sabaware.
Yeah, Sabaware. I think his website is pretty much just on Facebook, but like, he owns a t-shirt shop, and he also hosts like underground hip hop shows. And so my group, my hip hop group, was on tour, and we went there and we did a whole hip hop show. And then they went and did, they basically just graffitied as much as the town as they could. It was nice graffiti. It was like, you know, pictures and things like that, but murals that they did all around town, but it was all based on water. And the conversation was like, you know, this is how we make it relevant to others who may not be interested in this. I wish people cared, but they don't. So this is how we can get them to talk about it. This is how you get that regular dude who just wants a show to talk about water. Be like, you win a contest if you can write this verse. Oh, excellent. I'm about it. Let's do it. Water, water, water. The same thing did happen in Austin with several musicians back in 2000 and I want to say 2015. Is when a bunch of underground hip hop artists put on shows about water, and it was real big for a second, right? It was real big for a second, and if anything, it's just more like, how do we incorporate it into part of the city? I really think it's going to be about legislation, right? So if you can get all these really cool influencers to back any piece of legislation that says we're going to take care of this space, and these are the kind of grasses you need to have, and this is how it needs to be placed. That's all it is. All influencers want something really cool to get behind, right? Yay. I'm not joking, man. That lady who gave up her kid, rehomed her child. Like, you know, influencers have so much power, and if we can find a way to tap into what they're doing, if we can find a way to tap into what artists are doing and get them to care about these issues and to back these issues, it will be important. Water is, I love that you had that experience, that personal experience. I've only worked in the advocacy around it through art. My first photography series was called Water, and it was based on that. And it's where I got my first exhibit, was because I was talking about the Dakota pipeline, all the other fun stuff. And it's now actively in a lot of my work where you'll see me talking about water. And so I think it's important to just find we care about all this stuff and we get super serious about it, but the average everyday Joe isn't going to do that. So we have to find a way to get them to care. And sometimes it is as simple as getting that IG influencer to do the things. So that's my 2 cents. I'm sorry, did I say something that was ableist? Racist?
No, you were talking about that person that rehomed their child or whatever.
Oh, yes. I was like, what the did I say? I was like, did I say?
Sorry, I didn't mean to, not you.
Okay.
Like YouTuber. Don't worry, I would have been more vocal about it if you said something I was like, really, but yeah, anyways.
Yeah, but you're right, she is. Her whole family.
Before we jump into poems, I just want to say one thing. If anyone is trying to like convince people why plants are important, doesn't have all the language, a very simple example I've told people that like shut them up pretty quick. And a lot of these people grew up in Texas that I've talked to, is ask them on a summer day, would they rather walk barefoot on asphalt or on grass? And no one's gonna say asphalt. And they'll like, and then just have them imagine that grass all around them. So like if we let vines grow on buildings, kind of stuff like that.
Great, such good pointers, y'all. Now I want to, sorry, we are like overtime. But if you're down to stick around, I am down. Hopefully panelists are down as well. I'd love to just hear one banger, because they're all bangers, from every panelist, just like one poem. And then after that, we'll get into the Q&A portion. Anyone can start who feels it on their heart to share a poem.
I can go first. I've been going last, so I can go first. Also, because I got so nervous, I was trying to decide what to read, and I'm really glad I picked this one. So, if it's cool, I'll give a little context. So this is a poem I wrote after spending some time in a canyon that's currently called Palo Duro Canyon. It's in the northern part of the state of Texas. And the land actually has a really complicated history. So there's a lot of different tribes that have history there and had significant historical events take place there. So the Comanche tribe, the Kiowa tribe, the Apache tribe, Wichita tribe, there's like a very long list. And that space has been turned into a national park, you know, as so many of like historically sacred spaces to Indigenous people have. And so it feels very distanced from that, but I wanted to go spend time there and try to reconnect with the space. But while I was there, I actually ended up finding a bunch of graffiti and other stuff that got me really upset. And I ended up like having this deep existential, like crying in the rain moment, and I wrote this poem. So the context, I really think the credit belongs to the canyon for this. The canyon taught me so much about myself and my lost body. Her rainbow of honeyed orange and red dirt hit my eyes with the rich glow. Its faded reflection in all of my photos failed to capture the earth's true colors, reminding me that the camera's inability to catch the subtle browns of my own curves is a trait that we share. Together we made another ellipse around the sun, and I hand beat settler graffiti out of formations with stones, and I offered my blood, harvesting red ruby cactus spines. Perhaps more than anything, her dance with the weather has reshaped me, her thunderstorms singing back songs, crimson soil and turquoise sky, and the blood that was spilled here to delay the apocalypse. Sacred ground where nations made peace to fight a common enemy. water running all of the bronze and copper and tamarind and red into one fluid tone, flooding the rivers and streams, filling the veins of the ground with life. Her lightning left me blinking back tears. Thunderclaps shook them from my lashes. They split the stars into fractal symbologies of geometry and fire, and I have asked myself 1,000 times, who am I? And she says she already knows. Drowning my deep sense of insignificance in the beauty of the unclaimed wild and remembering how vast and full of our lost selves this land still is, no matter how we've tried to kill it, no matter how we've destroyed ourselves. Everything that we have ever mourned losing, we once found, and everything that we have ever found has come from the earth, and everything that we have ever lost has dissolved back into her, and every scattered shard of these stolen miracles that still lives on lies in wait there, like so many seeds beneath concrete, waiting for rain.
Thank you so much for sharing. Faye, Soups, whichever one of y'all.
I can go. This one is one that we were talking about in the workshop that I shared part of. I'm gonna go ahead and read the whole thing for this. It's called Foreign Bodies. I'm still up in the air about it, about the title. A little frame of reference, I do mention several events that have happened in the news, taken from the headlines and incorporated. I want to read this poem because there's a line in it that was the only thing I can think for the last several days. That line is, "Am I the only one on fire? When you turn from yourselves to see your cities burning, do you not melt? Am I the only one on fire?" And so this is the poem that line comes from. You cannot tell me there's nothing wrong with the weather. Scientists discovered a new species of blind, flesh-toned fish flushed out from a hole in the earth of Kurdistan, almost an exact year after a photographer discovered the pronate body of Alan Kurdi, fleshed out from a hole in the earth of Turkey. Almost 4 years before, a journalist discovered the pronate bodies of Oscar Ramirez and Angie Valeria, fleshed out from a hole in the earth of Texas this past Sunday. The origins of this new species of fish are widely speculated, essentially unknown, but it is clear they are proliferating underground. You cannot tell me there was nothing wrong with the weather. I digested this data and disintegrated on a molecular level. Am now an ironic history of black heat, coaxing out your air and tearing through your defined shape. I have become the hidden hyphen, strangling the ice of your waist and shredding. There is something wrong with the weather, with my mouth, a silhouette of mud. I've swallowed men for a millennia, am now a register of cyclical genders, flushing out sex from a queer hole in my body. To say I am unknown is to say I am in flux, sucking on all the names and waterlogged roots dissoluble in the hinge of my black blue skin, both vessel and vision. I have become a fish and a woman and ready to die. A hurricane in the heart, my species survives, our wilted crowns bent at the center as green wave after green wave swaddles itself around our necks to bruise deep and distinctive. Listen to us. Bubble up and scratch our heads against the open air, whistle and arc. Awash along the thinning coast are our bodies, once lost in the sway of the ocean, a ribbon along the white shore of this man's land, a flush of color. We have always been going, are coming with the tide. You cannot tell me there is nothing wrong with the weather. I can feel it in my jaw. The thirst for copper tin sediment and meat fresh from the dying fields. Can't you feel it? California can't stop shaking. What it knows runs back and forth beneath the surface. A beast of ruin, gnawing on our dead, the fires of paradise chew through the face of the state, smokes out the menagerie of darkened bodies that clog its ancient streets with gangs of amen to camp on the floor of this wild. Can't you feel it? Greenland is melting. The yellow milk swished from its mouth out into the ocean is enough to feed the world's hungry with salt and suspended silt. When you turn from yourselves to see your cities burning, do you not melt? Am I the only one on fire? Texas is drowning. The flooded borders, overcome with waves of help us, help us, help us, congeals into cement puddles large enough to float and swallow our country of survivors. Are we not now all wet? Is my body the only one still gasping for air? You cannot tell me there is nothing wrong with the weather.
Ooh, thank you so much for sharing. Ooh. Soups, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Amazing. I want to give a trigger warning. This poem is about my grandfather who lost his life to police brutality. If you are not in the headspace to listen, I completely respect that, understand that. I would invite you just to like mute your computer. That way you could be here for the Q&A as well. I don't want my poem to like kick you out of the Zoom. So here I go. Genesis 4:10 reads, "And the Lord said, what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries to me from the ground." This is considered the first prayer of the Bible, a colored man's blood crying out to Elohim. Years later, America pledges to be one nation under God, purchases her freedom with 2 lands of prayers, and is still forcing us to pray, or both. I am told I look like my mother. She is white and alive. I am told I look like my paternal grandfather. He is Black and was forced to say amen the year I was born. A cop turned his life into prayer, called it suicide, probably meant sacrifice, and went home, remained unaffected when the truth revealed itself. Today, I am late to work. Don't let the speed limit control the weight of my foot. A cop pulls me over, and I wonder if he will see more of my mom in me or my grandpa. I wonder which part of history will repeat itself today, the part where I am 6 and my mom argues her way out of a ticket, or if my grandpa will be waiting at the gates for me. The cop asks why I look so nervous, and how do you say, "Sir, I'm not nervous. It's just from the moment I took my first breath, half my ancestors rolled in their graves, called out to a white God and cursed my existence. I am the mixed fruit that would have killed my father once, would have never met my mother's lips. My Genesis is a family tree of good and evil, roots planted in dichotomy, bloodlines leading back to colonizers and kidnapped, masters and slaves, abusers and victims, white and Black, though it be anything but clear. It's not nerves, it's the understanding that if slavery never happened, I would most likely not be here today. My family tree casts shadows of both the people who were hung and the ones who hung them. All their blood boils in this body over history lost, history forgotten, history neglected. The intertwined history of my ancestors, all of it producing me, an accident fought against and a legacy fought for. And I know it sounds dramatic. My therapist calls it bipolar disorder. She doesn't get that there are generations of my ancestors at war inside of me. And I just think it all deserves a better ending than she ran a red light. But of course, instead of explaining any of that, I remain silent. I think of the last picture taken of my grandfather. He is holding me in his arms, staring at me with a smile, telling my parents how he will spend the summers teaching me to play tennis. He was late to work in Kansas, going 10 miles per hour over the speed limit, trying to chase down lost time, and never made it into work or home or anywhere ever again. I try to remember the last picture I took. I hand over my license and proof of insurance, my hand shaking the whole time, drop them both on accident. The cop looks at me concerned, tries to comfort me and says, "Hey, I'm not going to shoot you. TV and internet's got you thinking we're all the bad guys," and tries to welcome me calm with a laugh. I don't tell him how I don't watch television, how all my friends think it's weird I choose not to have Wi-Fi, or how the picture of my grandfather holding me hangs above my bed. And I see it every night and every morning, how I am told I look just like him, and how today I hate that I am wishing to be anything but like him, how I'm not ready to say amen. I still need to learn how to play tennis. I don't tell him that I am hating myself for forgetting the one lesson my grandpa was forced to teach me.
Thank all 3 of y'all so much for sharing. It feels really special. I'm thinking about it a lot. Thank you, Soups. Thank you, Althea. Thank you, Felita. I now want to Open the floor for questions. You guys stuck around even past the 3:30 time that we very ambitiously put. So yeah, if you want to put some questions in the chat, I'll be reading the chat. I'm happy to ask them for you if you don't feel comfortable saying them out loud. But otherwise, the floor is open.
I have a question for whoever wants to answer. So this is something I think a lot about, and I know it's not like an original question and people get asked it all the time, but I want to hear what y'all have to say. So like, how do we convince people that climate change is an immediate problem and not a far off problem? Because there's plenty of data, but like it's not enough, you know, because if people would be convinced by the data, they would be convinced by the data by now.
I feel like the answer is obviously going to be different depending on the person. So it's hard to generalize, but like one archetype in my head of an argument or a conversation that plays out with someone that ended decently was with me actually giving them access to resources with video of, you know, people who had taken the time to document, you know, like extreme consequence in their community, basically like them actually seeing someone else give them testimony via video. I've sent, you know, documentaries to people and sometimes it helps. I've sent campaigns to people and sometimes it helps, but I feel like it's a hard question to generalize about because what is it that makes it far away is different depending on who you are. Is it far away because it's like impossible for you to imagine? Yeah, okay, cool, I can send you some. Is it impossible for you to imagine it having an impact on you because of your positioning in the world? Do you have like the power to move away from a problem in your mind? Is this something that you can mitigate somehow, or is it feel far away literally just because it's out of sight? Does it feel like, I just feel like there's so many complicated factors in determining like what is your proximity to a sense of climate instability, and like I don't know how to answer it better than that. I'm sorry.
Like maybe like add one thing to my question. Like the people I'm thinking about specifically, I'm thinking of people like in my hometown of like Westlake, Lake Charles, Louisiana. So it's not that they're not affected by climate change and they have like evidence in their backyard, right? Like the plants are right there and you see them every day. And they work for these refineries. And I think part of it's denial because they can't face like what their own jobs are doing to them. But I think it's like more complicated than that. I don't know. It's become like such a partisan issue, which is really alarming to me. And I don't know how to talk to people on the other side of the political line because they think I'm just spewing propaganda, you know?
There's a documentary I watched recently called Atomic Homefront. It is available in full on YouTube. It was originally released on HBO and it's still there. It is about a town that's like, basically the creek in their backyard is used as a disposal site for atomic particles. And kids, there's no fence on the creek, so kids run through it all the time. And this high school class realized that all of them in their 40s, I'm not sure the exact percentage, but it was an overwhelming, like more than 80% of them had like stage 4 cancer by the time they were 40. And they were able to trace it back to this creek. And the EPA said like they can't put signs up because it's not an immediate danger. It takes time. But all this stuff, I think that's a good documentary to send to people because I don't think people realize that how much climate change can affect you. And now before I get in a creek, I make sure I do the research because they don't have to put a sign up. And so that's just a good documentary that it does get political because they like go to the EPA, but the issue itself is something that like nobody would have access to. And so someone who doesn't, I don't want to say doesn't care, but doesn't understand why they need to care, might watch that and then be able to take away from it that they don't have all the information they think they know. Everything that they interact with might not be safe. And I think that's just a really good documentary. unfortunately, I assume a lot of the people, and this is an assumption, that don't care or take time to learn, a lot of these people being affected in the documentary are like white middle class Americans who they might, for some, well, I know the reason, who they might actually listen to and take into consideration. The documentary does go over Black and brown children who are also in that creek as well, but the mom who is like not backing down from the APA is like a white middle class mother who is incredibly aware of her privilege and just does it so well, but she is like the face they'll see and maybe they'll listen to that face.
I would agree. I like that the recommendations are documentaries, which are done by directors and artists who take that time to do the research about it and then take that time to go and film it and then take that time to edit it and put it together and make it something that is easy for other people to access. And if you're not watching a movie, you're probably going to be reading an essay, right? A well-titled essay that will probably show up in like a mid-tier magazine or journal or something like that, which means that there was a writer who went and did that research and, you know, got it accepted and it was shared. And that's something that's super important, I think, to remember, is that the way that we try to connect with others is through art. And it will always be through art. At least in my personal experiences, it's always been through art. You know, we watch the news and they're not just journalists, you know, they has to have good graphics. Because we don't trust an outlet that has like a crappy little graphic and it's like explosion in the bag. You're like, bro, but we do trust that logo that's red. And not all of us trust that logo, but you know what I'm talking about. We consider it a legit logo because it's red and the bold lettering, things like that. Even that, the graphic design that was required for that was done by an artist. And so there's so much that we can do to help people care. And a lot of it is going to be through artistry. I think our roles as writers, I think almost everyone in here is a writer. I think our role as writers is to find new and relevant ways to share information. I really do love the video essay, right? Because it's a script that you write and that you curate. And then you can film it however you would like to film it. I think that that is one way to get people to care, is to make it easy for them to access. Can you tell me about why it matters to me in less than 5 minutes with pretty graphics and music? Because that's about the time that we have to try to convince somebody to like start thinking about it differently. I think that artists have a big role to play, and that it's hard to be super creative about spreading that message because it does take so much back time to like research and get everything set up. Doing interviews in the middle of a pandemic is kind of crazy. Like, my goal was to like drive all the way to California, do some interviews there, go to New York. I was supposed to be in New York next week. Like, you know, I was going to do interviews there, and now I have to like completely rethink how I want to do everything to get the ideas I would like to get across. So I think as writers, we just got to think about, at least when I grew up and I was first starting to do writing and poetry and all that, publishing was a way of selling out. Right? I was told I was a sellout if I was trying to get paid for what I did. If I asked for more than $50 to perform, I was a sellout. Why don't I just do it for the love of the community? Why don't I just do it for other people? The fact is, I'm an artist. I still have bills to pay. I still have to go to the doctors. I still need to, like, you know, keep a roof over my head. And getting paid for that is not a bad thing. And I'm saying this to tell you, please pitch your ideas. If you think your idea is too out there, it probably isn't. Pitch it, see what happens, right? Because there's a way for you to live sustainably while also telling other people your POV about the things that we care about, especially when it comes to climate crisis. If you could put together any sort of project that connects the literary world with the climate crisis and make that authentic and new, for the reader and for a publication, they would love you, because it's not incarceration and it's not, the pandemic. They want something new and fresh, including right now, there's a deadline for June 1st for Catapult Publishing, which is a magazine online. They're well read. They're also a publishing house. They publish books, and they're looking for anything that's a personal essay that's not about COVID-19, but also includes something outside of yourself, like climate crisis. Pay is between $150 and $200, right? I think that just about anybody in this room could write a personal essay that's about the climate crisis and connects to, like, any of the other things that we talked about, any of the other intersections, sensuality. I talked about incarceration, so they probably don't. I keep talking about incarceration, but all the other things that you can do to intersect, pitch that, share that in essays, because there are so many people who do take those essays to policymakers. I've seen it happen where an attorney will get up and be like, in this article, which talks about blah, 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 the stats say, and literally have that piece of paper in their hands that they printed out on their computer. That gives them some sort of clout and support to what their theories are and how the policy should be shaped. It's all, there's so much that you can do as a writer. It's not as obvious and not as evident. So don't think you don't have any power. You really do. That poem really could be in a commercial, right? If you pitch it to the right people, you really can have it out there in the general public. And I think that's going to be the way we do it, is just making sure that we keep inundating with facts and creative ways to address these issues. So that is my 2 cents.
Amazing. I feel like I was just in a masterclass for a minute. But out of the interest of time, we're gonna stop there. I'm sure that Althea, Subs, Felita would be happy to talk offline